Good after or good evening, I guess, to you. Happy to be here with you. Feeling a little better today than I did on Sunday. We'll just put it like that. I can safely say that here this evening. But I'm glad to be here, glad to be back with you as well. Tonight we are continuing in our miracles lessons. We only have 3 more, including tonight. So we are almost to the end of these. And I have told you already that we would be, after this, we're going to be talking about Jesus's last week on earth. And this kind of gets into that just a little bit here this evening. And so we'll be talking a bit about this tonight. But to start with, and for a good bulk of tonight, we're going to be talking about something that I'm sure you all are experienced with, and that's fig trees, right? Maybe not. No? Okay. Well, maybe not. So, Jess, you got any fig tree knowledge? All right. So I'm glad that my horticulturalist sister is here, because all the things that I will make up, because y'all won't know any better, she'll call me out on it here tonight. So when we talk about fig trees here this evening, that's where we'll be looking at. This is a miracle that we see in 2 different spots. We see it in Matthew chapter 21, but for our sake tonight, we're mostly going to be in Mark chapter 11. So go ahead and be turning to Mark chapter 11. When you are there, there's a lot going on in Mark chapter 11. To start with, Jesus enters into Jerusalem. My Bible says the triumphal entry. We're not going to talk about that. We'll save that for a few weeks when we covered that last week. Then we'll talk about the fig tree. Then Jesus cleanses the temple. It is sort of squeezed in there as well. And then they're going to go back and look at the fig tree afterwards. So with your permission tonight, we're not going to talk about Jesus cleansing the temple. We'll skip over that for that this evening. But we are talking about the withered fig tree. And again, we are in Mark chapter 11 this evening. So let's get into it here just a little bit by talking about fig trees. Like I said, we're going to talk about fig trees, so let's go ahead and do so. Fig trees are mentioned quite often in the Bible. They come up quite often. And around Palestine and in mountain areas, again, we've used this word before, but mountain is sort of a relative term there, but they were fairly common. And they generally at this in this area, Jess, you can vouch for this, it said they grow to 10 to 15 feet tall. Okay. So it's a decent sized tree for the time for where they are. And they have a thick coverage of leaves. And so that gives you a little bit of shade in an area that's fairly warm. And in warm climates, places like Israel, the fig tree produces 2 crops each year. We even have some things like that if it's warm enough, it may grow in multiple times. The early one, which is ripe about June, and a later, more important one, which is ripe around August. And so that was my sort of study of a fig tree. But you can see there, and we'll talk about it a little bit more as well, figs are certainly something that you could eat. And I've got some pictures of that here in a second. And it could provide a little shade for you as well. And so when we see Jesus with this fig tree, this is kind of what we are looking for. Okay. Does anybody hear a squeaking sound? You got a cricket in here? All right. All right. We will make it. We will make it. Huh? Chirpy things. Well, if something was chirping, I just wasn't sure if it was me or not. Ben, I appreciate you stepping in for me on Sunday evening, and you heard the cricket on Sunday evening, if that's what it was, as well. Oh, okay. Well, so let's talk a little bit about this. By December, and again, this is all about figs and what I've read about them and prepping for. But by December, the leaves of the fig tree have shed and the trees are bare until the end of March when the leaf buds begin to appear. And at the same time, tiny figs begin to grow. And I thought this was a pretty good picture because you can see different sizes, different colors, maybe get a sense of maturity there as well. And when they reach the size of a cherry, they'll fall to the ground. So we know how big a cherry is roughly, and that does not look like the size of a cherry right there. And so these are the unripe or the immature figs. In Hebrew, they're called taksh, and even unripe, they could still be eaten. How many of you have ever ate a fruit or something that was unripe? Okay, it's not quite ready, but you could scarf it down maybe if you had to, but you might know that it might be better if we wait a month or so before the better ones come out. So even the unripe or the immatures could still be eaten. Some of these immature figs remain on the tree. They ripen to perfection about June and are then known as what are called early figs or the first ripe. Now, first ripe figs are greatly desired for their delicate flavor. We see them mentioned a few different times. And so I have 4 different scriptures where first ripe fruits are mentioned. It's not necessarily figs, a couple of them are figs, but just first ripe fruits are mentioned. It's a little smaller because I want to fit them all into one spot. But let's look at each of these here to start with. The first one, Isaiah 28:1. Booty, care to read that one? So we see Isaiah mention a first fruit there. Maria, what about the one below it there? Jeremiah 24:2. All right. So Jeremiah makes reference to a good basket and then a bad basket. Dad, Hosea 9:12. So he's not really talking about figs, but in there he's comparing Israel, making a comparison to figs. There were some that were good, but then some that went bad. Mom, what about the last one there? Micah 7:1. And so those are just 4 mentions of first ripe fruits. But in each case, what is the desired fruit by the author? The first ripe ones, they want the best of it right there. And we see that quite often. These are all Old Testament, but we even see Jesus make reference to that in the New Testament as well. Couple pictures here. These are Google images. So this is what I came up with some dried ones. The dried ones, I think, are what's on the cover of the Fig Newton packages, I think. Oh, probably people in here eat those or not. I don't know. And then the interior here, I thought this kind of had a little bit of a pomegranate look to it on the inside as well. Has anybody in here ever ate a fig? Okay. Are they good, bad, indifferent? Delicious. How do you eat them? Do you chop them up? Do you just eat it like an apple? Like how do you go about it? It's kind of like eating peanuts or whatever. Just, okay. Kind of like a prune. Has anybody ever ate anything like this where it was sort of you have? Okay, cut it open. Make sure there's no bug. You put anything on it or you just eat it as is? Eat it as is. All right. Okay. Figs with honey. Will. It's like it's missing something there. All right. So there we go. So. All right. So not to make anybody hungry or maybe to turn anybody's stomach if it doesn't look good to you. Either way, we see it there. The story tonight takes place during the Passover season, which corresponds to our March or April. So based on what we talked about with figs, what would be the expected sort of fig ripe situation in March or April? Not ready. I mean, we said it's probably going to be June, July, August before it's ready. Now, based on what we saw, though, might there be some figs on it? Maybe, but is it what you're going to want to eat? Probably not. And so every fig tree that produced fruit would have some of this immature figs upon it. So you heard Ben there. He said if they didn't have anything there on them early, they're probably just going to be a barren tree or just not going to produce anything the whole time. So the fig tree in this story that we'll read it in just a second had its leaves, which was a sure sign that it had immature figs because those figs would develop ahead of the leaves. So I want to give you just a little bit of background there on it, although I actually think there's one more thing as well. So during this final week, happens when Jesus is in his final week here on earth. And on the first day of the week, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. That's in Mark chapter 11, those first 11 verses. And you can see it there. If we skip down a little bit here, many of the people had come from the city to meet him. Others from the countryside had followed. All of these people were sort of promoting, talking about, encouraging, whatever word you want to use there, Jesus as he rode in. And so the next day, when he's going to journey again to the city, he'll be hungry, and that's where he's going to come to the tree then. So we'll talk about that in our story this evening. I looked up a picture of a barren fig tree, and this is what I came up with. So this picture is quite different from the one that we started with. It's decent in size, but this would provide no shade. It would provide no food. It would provide no benefit for anyone who was looking for something there. There's an old picture here. I found this interesting. It's something that still exists. This is about 630 years ago, but they don't know who painted this. But it was a man. I had to do some Dutch. I can read a little bit of Dutch. Don't ask me any questions because it kind of looks a little bit like German, which kind of looks a little bit like English. So I was making out the hardest part of it to the best that I could. But I realized there's no name. It's the Master of Antwerp Adoration. It's a title given. They have no idea who painted it. So imagine if you painted or drew or made some kind of artwork and then it was still being shown hundreds of years later and nobody knew who it was. I don't know. It would be kind of disappointing, but it took 6 years to do it. It's in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which is where all the old Dutch masters. I've shown you a few things from there as well. Let's get into what we're going to talk about tonight, though. This is Mark 11. We're going to start with verses 12 through 14. Granny, do you care to read this one? All right. Now, what was that look, Melvina? Because I think I can relate to. I think I know what that meant. That's kind of a harsh rebuke to the tree. Maybe I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but that's what I was thinking as well. I want you to go into that spot of Jesus for a second. But you're not Jesus, but you're driving down the road and you are hungry, and all of a sudden you see a sign for a restaurant. How does it make you feel when you see something like that? Good, right? I'm starving, and we rounded the corner, and here this place is. Now, have you ever seen a restaurant or a gas station or somewhere where you could get some kind of food or some kind of snack, and you pull up to the door, and it's closed? How does that make you feel? How many of you have ever uttered a sentence like, I will never eat at another Hardee's again, or whatever it is? Now you know what Jesus is thinking about, right? So right there, then and there is like, no one will ever eat fruit from you again. Why do we make that comment when we have that situation happen? Why do we say that? I will never stop at Burger King ever again. Dissatisfied, right? We're dissatisfied because we've been looking for something and we found this and we expected it to deliver and it did not deliver when we desired it right there. I don't know. We're going to talk about that just a little bit here as well. Describe the tree that Jesus saw in Mark chapter 13 or Mark chapter 11 and verse 13. Okay. Right. So this is, Jesus is clearly hungry right here. I mean, verse 12 says he was have all spoken highly of to eat them in different dishes. And it's like, oh, I'm hungry. Or let's saunter over there to it. But then what did it look like in verse 13? What does Jesus see? Just leaves. Nothing else. This is not what he would have been desiring, not what he would have been looking for. Now, Melvina asked the question. She said, why did he think it would be there? What do you think about that? Why do you think that this tree would have provided something? Again, this is March, April. We kind of made it clear that it's going to be June, July, August before it's going to be anything good. Why might he have walked over to that with any kind of hopes? Say it again. Even though it's out of season, there might be something there. If I'm hungry, I might say, I don't want to ever eat at McDonald's, but if I'm hungry, McDonald's is on the side of the road, where am I going to go? I'll probably take that one. So it might be a situation where he looked at that and thought, well, there might be a little something there. How did the tree deliver? Tree did not deliver. So Jesus said what to the fig tree? Go back to verse 14. What does Jesus say to the fig tree? This is why I want you to have your Bible out there, because I take the scripture off. But all right, let no one eat fruit from you ever again. Fair enough. Well, y'all have ate figs, so it can't be all of them because they still exist. But I believe it's going to definitely be that one. Jesus says, nobody's going to eat fruit from you ever again. Yes. Mm-hmm. A little frustrated, a little irritable. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was hoping to get at, and that's why I asked you about the food on the gas station on the side of the road, is that we all can relate to that, right? If we've been driving for 10 minutes and the store's closed, it's not that big of a deal. But we're in the 6th or 7th hour of the trip trying to get to Florida, trying to get these loud kids down to the beach so they'll quit yelling. We're going to stop. It needs to be open. And if it's not, well, I'm going to get. Jesus had a humanity that we see as well. Now, did the disciples hear him? It's interesting in verse 14. What does verse 14 end with? Like specifically says, and the disciples heard him. Now, I've asked you, we've played this game a few times before. Be a disciple. You just witnessed this. What's your thoughts on it? You just witnessed what Jesus said. What are your thoughts? Mary, I'm sorry, Tony. That was that's kind of mad at the picture. A little rough, Mary. A little bit of a temper tantrum. So I think, Mary, you're right. It was a bit of a temper tantrum. I'm sure they could relate to it. They've all, as we all said, we're human. Mom, what did you say? Yeah, everybody kind of, if they heard it, it wasn't like, no true you will ever. Yeah, it was clearly said loud enough that people could have heard it. Yes. Sure. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. I think you're right, especially the walking part there, you would burn off those calories. You'd want something to eat. Go ahead. Right. I don't know. Yep. I don't know. I don't know. Tough question. Tough question. Tom? Hold on just a second. Go ahead, Tom. We'll see that here in just a second as well. But to answer Melvina's question, and I can't answer it, but to answer it anyway, Melvina's question was, why didn't he bless the tree and make figs grow right then rather than the other way around? Have you has used in really any of these miracles? Yeah, I think so. But we've talked about these miracles before. How many times during this series of lessons have we said, I probably wouldn't have done it that way? We've said that quite often, right? Or, Linda, you would have done it one way, but I'd have done it a different way. Jess, you'd have done it a different way. So I don't know if we can answer that question. Ben was going to answer Ben first. Okay. Okay. Now stop. Now stop. You did real good until the end, and I had to off there just a little bit. Mel. I don't know. It's a good question as well. Let's go through it, maybe just a little bit more. Other questions. Other questions before. Okay. Perhaps so. We'll come back to. We're going to skip a couple of verses. Let's go further. Yeah, gosh, we're going to have to. Can the principal come in here and take this crew out here? We're trying to get done here, and it's just not. It's not. It's a good thing none of y'all have to work tomorrow. All right. Mark 11. Let's go. We skipped a handful of verses there. 15 to 19, I think it was, is when Jesus cleanses the temple. Like I said, we will deal with that in our next series of lessons. So we're going to skip over that because now time has passed. We've moved on to the next day, as it were. Kevin, do you care to read verses 20 to 24?
For surely I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them.
All right. So that last little bit there should sound kind of familiar to what Ben had read just a few moments ago as well. Let's go a little further with it. So the next morning, verse 20, they go back out, and yes. I think so. Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Could be. Could be. So they go back the next day. They go past it the next day. How does the fig tree appear the following morning? All right. It is dried up. The Bible says, the New King James in verse 20, I think, dried up from what? From the roots, right? And we all have seen plants or trees or whatever. It's not just, it's missing its, y'all probably got some trees at home that are missing some leaves right now, right? But this was dried up. It was withered up from the bottom all the way. This is, I look at my tree in my front yard and I'm pretty confident that leaves are going to come back on it in the spring. But there are some trees that I see when I drive by. There's a few across the fence in the backyard that they'll never grow anything on. They are dried up from the very bottom. Tom? Right. It will. It will. But this one is clearly shows over for this fig tree. So Peter then calls attention to it. Hey, what did Peter say? I think it's in verse 21 right there. What was it that Peter said? He says, well, he says, Jesus, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered away. Now, I'm only looking at verse 22. I know Jesus speaks in 22 throughout the rest, but I only want to look at verse 22. How did Jesus respond to what Peter said? Only verse 22. Said, have faith in God. Now, he's going to talk a little bit more in a second, but he said to Peter, have faith, or it's probably to all the disciples, but Peter's the one who had said it, but he says, have faith in God. Now, Ben said a minute ago, he said it kind of sets up a chance to teach about something. Well, Jesus realizes that his time is almost over. Now, that says right there, it was the third day of the final week, so it's about over. But we see the question there at the bottom. The disciples would need great faith to preach the gospel after Jesus left them. Why would that be so important? Why would their task be so difficult once Jesus was gone? Okay.
And they, as a new cornerstone, they can't afford to show any cracks. They show any weakness in Christ that we have to show them.
Absolutely. What else is going to make it tough for the disciples once Jesus is gone? Absolutely. And we've seen it over and over again. Who kind of fixes things when the apostles messed up? Jesus does, right? It's kind of like when you're growing up and your parents might get mad at you, but you also know that they can hopefully fix something. Well, when Jesus is gone, you mess up, who's going to have to own it? When Peter messes up, when Andrew and John, when they mess up going forward, how do you fix it? They got to fix it, right? So, right. And so in Mark 11 and verse 23, they could not what in their heart? Couldn't doubt, but rather they must what? Now that's an easy sentence to write on the board, but that's a hard sentence to execute. You cannot doubt in your heart, but rather must what? That's pretty easy when Jesus is there. And if I mess up, he's probably going to fix it, but now he's gone and you got to fix it. And if you're not careful, doubt will creep in. Do we see doubt creep in even before Jesus dies? In who? In Peter, who might have been who they were talking to here in the first place. But when Peter, they'll come up to, this is the third day. We're just a day or two away from them asking Peter if he knows who Jesus is. And Peter saying who? Saying what? That guy? And they were saying like, I've seen you with him. I don't know him. You have a language, you have an accent that sounds like, it's not me. He gets even mad about it. Curses and said, I don't know him at all. That's a little doubt creeping in. It's going to be even tougher going forward.
Hoping that his shadow
Mm-hmm.
and they would be healed.
Right.
So we know that happened.
Right.
These guys want to go from doubt themselves and have the most. Jesus is showing them this miracle. You can change the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because this tree here is healthy as a good thing.
Right.
And then the next day,
Mm-hmm.
he's telling them the same thing to the people. And I think the end of that time, the right attendance scored against Anderson County. They kicked the ball, 4 seconds left, and he's got it, they're 5 points behind. And he said after the game, he ran to us and made a touchdown. He said, I knew we had to score, and I knew I would.
Right.
That's confidence.
Right.
That's what these
Sure.
are going to have to get. They got to do the job.
Right.
And they've got to know.
Erase the doubt
Right.
in absolutely. So the last question, and this goes back to what Ben read at the start from the Sermon on the Mount. For the disciples to have the kind of faith that they're going to need, and you've been talking about this a little bit, but it was necessary for them to do what in verse 24? Well, Leland, say it again. They was going to have to pray, and even more than that, that's a correct answer, but let's go into verse 24 just a little bit. Therefore, I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray. So he's automatically saying they're going to have to pray. But the sentence doesn't end there. He says even more. So let's look at the back half of verse 24. When you pray, what? Believe that you will receive them. There is a tendency, I think we might sometimes pray for things without a lot of belief that it's going to happen, right? Part of that might be because we maybe believe it ought to happen the way we want it to happen, right? But he says to them, you're going to have to pray, and that what's going to happen will happen. How does verse 23 and 4 go together then? How does what Jesus said in verse 23 and verse 24, how does that sort of go together?
Well, if you're doubtful, it's hard to believe. Okay? It's
Mhm.
extremely doubtful. It's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's, this is sort of the jumping off point, as it were, for Jesus. And that, like Mary said, they've always had somebody sort of along for the ride that was helping them. And now that faith is going to be challenged when you don't have that person, that person that's there with you. Other thoughts on 23 and 24? Let's finish it up with verse 25 and 26. Tom, you want to test out the new eye there? So. What Ben read earlier is about halfway through the Sermon on the Mount. It's in chapter 6. Sermon on the Mount is Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. The entirety of all three, with the exception of a couple of verses in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus. So we might as well say that what the Sermon on the Mount is the first time that we really see Jesus sort of presenting to a crowd. Let's just say it that way. This is almost at the very end of Jesus's time on earth. Has the message changed any? Think about what Ben read, Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 to 15. Flip back if you want to. And then think about what's here on the screen. It's not, but it really is. Matthew chapter 6, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us of our what? Debts or trespasses. What do you see right up there? Forgive us of our trespasses. As we do what? What does it say right up there? But if you don't forgive, so did the message change from the start of Jesus' journey to the end? Not really. It was always about praying. It was always about being forgiving of other people. And we struggle with that, don't we? Even today. And I think it's interesting that Jesus started with that and finished with that. I mean, it's not the end of Jesus, but it's essentially near the end of Jesus's teaching by this point, that he kind of stayed on message the whole time. And then the apostles, they were sort of all over the place. They would forget it, and they would remember it, and they would mess up, but they were human, just like we sort of do the same thing. Tom? It is. Absolutely. Ben, did you have something, Ben? Or okay. So we said that we already answered this question. I should have put it up already, but what else did the disciples have to do when they prayed? Well, not in verse 25 and 26. They had to believe, but they needed to what? They had to forgive. They would have to forgive as well, because we pray for forgiveness, and they would need to forgive going forward as well. Thoughts on this before we wrap up? No. Sure. Mm-hmm. Others? What's that? So Melvina asked at the beginning, why was this a miracle? Well, I can't make a tree just wither and die. Mary can make plants wither and die. But the reality is we can't do that, right? We can't do that. And it's probably good that we can't, because we sometimes might overreact a little bit, because we have already looked at how we would respond in that we have examples of how we respond in a similar situation to what Jesus came across right there. Let's talk about 3 things here. Number 1, leaves don't always mean fruit. In this story, Jesus sees the tree with the leaves. There should have been fruit there, right? Should have been fruit, but the tree didn't have it. And so the tree to him at that time was worthless. And so he curses the tree and withered away. Ben was kind of getting at this just a minute ago when I had to stop him there, I think. But sometimes we can have a lot of leaves, but we're not producing a whole lot of fruit. The fruit of the Spirit, we've been doing this on those Sunday night singing nights. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We have to do that, right? I can say I'm a Christian. I can say I love God. I can say I'm thankful for Jesus, but what if I'm not doing any of those things? I got a lot of leaves, but I'm not producing much fruit. We have to produce the fruits of righteousness. It can be deceptive in appearance, and we can be the same way. We can be deceptive in our appearance as well. And third, sometimes we all need a lesson on faith. Me more than anybody, I think. But the disciples were about a week away, well, a little longer than that, but the disciples were not far away from a big job. Jesus has said a few times, and he'll say it more during the week, that his time was about up. I don't know if they didn't believe him, they didn't understand it. It's hard to know exactly what it was. But whether they believed it or not, Jesus' time was about up. And it was time for them to sort of step out into the world on their own. And he assured them that if they can erase the doubt and if they can strengthen the belief, they'd be all right. Sometimes we need to read that same thing as well. Instead of increasing the doubt, try to shrink the doubt, increase the faith, and we'll be all right as well. That is a lesson to go home with. each time we come together, we extend an invitation. We extend an opportunity to have a change made in our lives. And tonight is no different. On the eve of Thanksgiving, so many things that we